This year saw the opening of Hakugei and Zadra, two giant RMC hybrid coasters that I've been fortunate enough to ride. But how do they compare to the original hyper-hybrid, Steel Vengeance, and have they surpassed this monster of a coaster? Which is the best of the big three RMCs? Let's find out. Hakugei is the first RMC to open outside of America, located at Nagashima Spaland. It replaced White Cyclone, a colossal wooden coaster. While it isn't quite as tall nor as fast as the other two, it definitely packs a punch, standing 180 feet tall and travelling over 66 miles an hour. Zadra is the first ever RMC to be built from the ground up, rather than from the remains of an old wooden coaster. It's the tallest of the three, standing 206 feet tall, and it's also the fastest, reaching speeds in excess of 75 miles an hour. Despite this, it's also the shortest in length and in duration, with its length only being about 3/4 that of Steel Vengeance. Steel Vengeance was the original hyper-hybrid and quickly topped many of my friends' favourites list, but that was before the other two were built. It set records for being the tallest, fastest and longest hybrid coaster in the world, and claimed one for the most airtime of any coaster. It stands 205 feet tall and reaches a speed of 74 miles an hour. But statistics can only tell part of the story of a roller coaster. Numbers can't quantify some of the most important aspects of what makes a coaster great, such as pacing, smoothness, sensation of speed, or even how the first drop feels. Now let me preface this next section by saying that all three are phenomenal coasters. I've been lucky enough to ride all three of them this year, and if you have the opportunity to ride any one of them, you should jump at the chance. Having said that, I'm sure everyone wants to know which one of them is the best, so let me break it down. The first drop of Zadra and Steel Vengeance are actually very similar. Both feature 90-degree drops and are within about 1 foot of each other in terms of height. I wouldn't say any one is better than the other two, however Hakugei's drop is a bit different. It may be less tall, but it packs more of a punch than either of the other two. After the lift hill comes a pre-drop section, which sends you round into a left turn before going straight into the first drop at speed. The other two take a bit more time to crest the lift hill before gravity takes over and the drop begins properly. On Hakugei, you're thrown straight over the edge, and the airtime is incredibly strong from the moment you hit the drop. If you've ever ridden El Toro, you'll know what I mean, with that pre-drop turn making it all the more intense and giving insane airtime. And it's because of this that Hakugei's drop feels much better than the other two. All three coasters give great views from about 200 feet up, but Zadra's is still a bit of a work in progress. Looking to the left, you see a big construction site, where the park's building yet another coaster. The views from Hakugei and Steel Vengeance are both impressive, looking back over parks filled with roller coasters. If I had to choose though, I'd say Steel Vengeance has the best view. Hakugei is nice, but it's a bit industrial with some rather ugly buildings across the water. And whilst Zadra gives a view of a building site, which isn't that appealing, this may change in the next year or so. Steel Vengeance has a huge lake to look out over though, as well as the rest of the steel jungle that makes up Cedar Point, giving it the edge in my opinion. On paper, Steel Vengeance is the most airtime of any coaster, but I think it's gone more for quantity of airtime over quality of airtime. Whilst the first big elements give some fantastic sustained air, there are too many elements where the airtime is just far too fleeting, and makes the ride feel rather jerky in sections. The bunny hills at the end are a good example of this, where you hit 4 very small hills in rapid succession, and it feels more like you're riding a jackhammer than a coaster, being thrown up and down into your restraint in a way that isn't very comfortable or enjoyable. I'd much rather one big hill giving some sustained airtime than these 4 little hills like this. It kind of takes a bit of a damper on the overall experience of Steel Vengeance's airtime. After the first drop of Hakugei, it really treats you to an amazing airtime sequence. The double up has to be some of the strongest airtime I've ever experienced on any coaster. It really sends you flying, particularly towards the front of the train. There's some great fun sideways airtime in the wave turn that follows, before a double down sends you flying once again. The rest of the ride is filled with ejector airtime hills and floaty sideways airtime, and it just feels fantastic. Zadra consists of mostly big elements that give a nice mix of airtime that actually changes throughout the day, being more floaty in the morning, but getting much stronger as the ride warms up throughout the day. The first turnaround gives some really nice tilted air, and there's a huge airtime hill in the second half of the ride. The strongest airtime, however, comes just before the final inversion, with a twisted airtime hill giving some intense ejector air. A highlight of Zadra is definitely the zero-G stall. This element is just massive and gives loads of upside down floater air. The other inversions are smooth and great fun, both being variations of zero-G rolls, but less memorable than that single giant breathtaking zero-G stall. It actually feels a bit different from the front to the back, where in the back you're kind of pulled through the element, giving a greater sensation of speed, yet still remaining weightless. Hakugei's inversions are remarkable for how smooth the flow is through them. The way the ride transitions from one element into and through an inversion is so incredibly smooth, and makes these elements feel absolutely fantastic. The zero-G maneuvers all give consistent floating upside down weightlessness, and all the inversions are really well spaced out throughout the ride. Whilst I like the other inversions on Steel Vengeance, the second one is probably my least favourite on any RMC. I believe they call it a twisted snake dive, but it's like a zero-G roll, but instead of exiting smoothly, it has a rapid jerk in the opposite direction that to me really interrupts the flow and smoothness of the ride. As I said, the rest of the inversions are all good fun, particularly the low-down rolls through the wooden structure, but this second one just seems to interrupt the ride and detracts from its flow in a really awkward manner. As such, I would say I prefer the inversions on the other two coasters. All three coasters hold a blistering pace, but I absolutely love the way Hakugei just flows from one element to another. Each element does something impressive, and then it gracefully transitions into the next. Every part of the track seems to have a purpose, and the way you glide through it is just sublime. The inversions are very well spaced throughout the ride too, giving a great variety of forces. Now, early POVs I saw of the ride seemed to look like it didn't quite keep the pace up towards the end. Having ridden it, I can tell you for sure that this isn't the case. From start to stop, this is probably the best paced ride I've ridden. The first part of Steel Vengeance has great pacing too, with some huge elements, but I think that it loses it towards the end of the ride. I noticed that several times you seem to hit an element, then are slammed into the side of your seat in a left turn, as the ride seems to run out of space and has to change direction. It's as if they had to cram too much track into the space left over by Mean Streak in order to secure a record, and I feel that it suffers as a result. The elements come rapidly, but each one lasts for such a short amount of time that you can't really appreciate any individual one before you're slammed into the next. The first half of Steel Vengeance has great pacing, but the latter half is nowhere near as good as Hakugei's. Zadra holds a great pace throughout. There isn't really any filler to any of it, but it seems over so quickly compared to the others. Whilst it certainly feels more substantial than Goliath, it does seem to end a little prematurely as you slam into the brakes at the end at high speed, and I think they could have included a few more elements to make use of that speed. Having said that, the way the ride races through the elements is fantastic, and the transitions flow really nicely from one section into another, particularly when the ride is fully warmed up during the day. While still not quite as good as Hakugei, I'd still rate the pacing of Zadra very highly. All three coasters feel fast throughout the ride. Hakugei and Steel Vengeance keep the sensation of speed up at the end of the ride by travelling through the track support so you have bits of wood flying past you at high speed, really adding to the sensation. Zadra only does this very briefly, but doesn't really need to, as the ride is shorter, so it still has enough energy to travel at high speed right until you hit the brakes at the very end. As a result, it's hard to pick between the three as to which is the best sensation of speed, as they all give such a great ride. All three coasters look impressive, but Hakugei really stands out with the contrast of white and blue really making it pop in the sunlight. The fact that Hakugei translates as white whale gives some sense to the name, as you see this huge mass of white wooden supports towering above you. In comparison, the dull red of Steel Vengeance's track looks a bit plain. It's okay for the cowboy railroad theme, but it doesn't pop the same way Hakugei does. The surrounding cowboy area is probably about as good as American theming gets though, but if we want to compare theming, Zadra has a whole new themed area about it, and from the moment you walk into this section of the park, you're greeted by a view of this huge coaster. It was a little strange hearing Hall of the Mountain King playing in the background as you enter this section of the park, as to an enthusiast it just makes you think of Alton Towers, but the vista you get is really impressive. I was really surprised to find so much other stuff in the Zadra section of the park too, with several restaurants, shops and bars, along with two other coasters. Now, I may have been very lucky at Energylandia and Nagashima Spaland, as when I went, wait times were very short, despite the rides being brand new. At Cedar Point, however, Steel Vengeance frequently has the longest wait times, typically in the 90-minute plus region, and even the fast lane queue sometimes moves rather slowly. This can really hamper your ability to re-ride, whereas on the other two I had to wait hardly any time before getting to jump back on. Also, the loose item policy of Steel Vengeance, where you're scanned with a metal detector and can't take any loose item into the queue, is a bit excessive. The other two rides let you carry what you want into the queue line, but have lockers right before you ride to put your stuff in. Overall, all three coasters are phenomenal, but I'm sure you want to know which one is best. There aren't many people who have been fortunate enough to ride all three of them, but after doing so in the same year, to me, there is a clear winner. Hakugei. My expectations weren't too high from watching the initial POV videos, but I can tell you now that they just did not do it justice, and anyone judging the coaster purely by that is a fool. After riding it, and having some time to reflect on the experience, it became my new #1 coaster to date, and I've ridden over 900 others. I like big elements that give sustained forces, and Hakugei delivers this over and over. The pacing is just sublime, the ride looks fantastic, and the airtime is powerful and plentiful, and to me it's just amazing. I'm not sure if another coaster will ever top it, but then I thought that about my previous #1 too. RMC continue to evolve though, and I can't wait to see what they come up with next. Which of the big three have you ridden, and which would you most like to ride? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe and check out some of the other videos I've made about these coasters and others. Thanks so much for watching, I'll see you again in another video very soon.